Hello, everyone. Welcome to the National Widowers Organization meeting for our annual National Men in Grief Day, every 30th of May. The NWO seeks to provide grief support for those who have lost a spouse, partner, or significant loved one. The NWO and the Men's Grief Network is a nonprofit group bringing men together in grief. Our organization is led by experts in loss, many of whom are widowers, and others who have grieved significant losses. The NWO offers free of charge resources, including articles, blogs, books, peer-to-peer support, and more to help men during this very difficult time and beyond. As men, we don't have to go through loss alone, whether it be the loss of a spouse, child, parent, friend, or sibling. I'm NWO board member Ken Levy, your host. Our topic tonight is surviving days when pulling the covers over your head is not a good option. For grieving men, there are really tough days. Tough days and not as tough days. And any of these could be triggered by red letter days on the calendar, such as Christmas, New Year's, Valentine's Day, and by the red letter days of our hearts. Birthdays, anniversaries, shared celebrative days, Super Bowl, World Series finals, the list goes on. Some men want to leapfrog those days and create a just ignore it agenda. However, holidays and special days can be gifts to men in our grief. Men need to offer hospitality to the holidays and the significant days in their grief, particularly today on National Men in Grief Day. Tonight's educator is Harold Ivan Smith. Harold is a fellow in Thanatonology recognized by the Association for Death Education. He wrote his doctoral dissertation on friend grief. He's authored many books, particularly A Decembered Grief, ABCs of Healthy Grieving, and with Joy Johnson, Partnered Grief. He is currently a celebrant for Forest Lawn Mortuary in Palm Springs, Cathedral City, California. Harold has some notes and further information which can be emailed to those interested, to everyone who's attended tonight. These will be sent to you via email after the presentation. And after the conversation with Harold concludes, we're going to have a Q&A, so share comments and questions with us in the chat box. Please send them throughout the event. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to you, Harold.
Thank you. It's good to be here on this very special day. I want to start talking tonight about a fellow writer here in Palm Springs, and his name is Stephen Rowley. And he gets temporary custody of his niece and nephew. His sister has died, and so now his brother-in-law, as a widower, is really overwhelmed. So the children are here, and they're having a conversation. And Patrick says very wisely, grief orbits the heart. Some days the circle is greater. Those are the good days. You have room to move, dance, and breathe. Some days are tighter. Those are the hard ones. And his brother-in-law says right away, they're all hard ones. And Patrick responds, well, right now they are. The easier ones are ahead. They come with time. But then Greg asks, what do I do until then? And this is from the book, The Guncle, which will be a movie in 25. And you kind of had an introduction to these special days. Very, very important. You cannot ignore them. You cannot leapfrog over them. And so I want to start by us looking at something that I call the grief bridge. And let me get ahead to where the grief bridge is. Okay. I like to use analogies, and the bridge seems to me to be one of the analogies that's very important. It's in essence, it's something, a bridge leads you from one place where you have been to a place where you're going. Of course, this picture is the Golden Gate Bridge. But to your far left of the screen, you would have the land of what was. And I could have added, and what I wish still was. And the land as what is this center part of the bridge, which is over the very treacherous narrows in heading into the Pacific. But you're heading toward San Rafael, which is the land of what can yet be. So I'm leaving what was. I've got to endure sometime on the middle of that bridge between the towers but desire is to get to where life can be, the land of where it can yet be. It's going to mean, though, there are days in that middle part of the bridge, like I photographed, when the fog was so incredibly thick. I knew there was a bridge there. I knew that from other times crossing the bridge, but parts of the bridge I could not see and could not see other cars. Hopefully, at some point, you're going to get this kind of image. I don't know when that will be, but I do know that you can't rush it. And some widowers have tried to rush it by jumping into new relationships that have created all kinds of tension for them. But it's important to start the day with gratitude. I call it making gratitude. And I found two quotes that I'd not used before that I really like. How lucky I am to have known somebody, and something that saying goodbye is so hard. And then, as my friends Core and Core have noted out in their textbook, the joy of knowing another human being far outweighs the void that is left when they are gone. Because I've learned in all these years of working in the field of thanatology, death and dying, there are a lot of people who have never had that great relationship. Not necessarily had a bad relationship, but it just wasn't a great relationship. Or it started out great, but then at some point it altered into a very different kind of relationship that you have endured. And so it's important to give gratitude. I taught grievers at St. Luke's Hospital, where I was on staff for 18 years. When they went to bed at night, to name three things they were grateful for. And sometimes people would snap, "What do you think I've got to be grateful for?" And I go, "Well, are you grateful that you had a marriage that went 30 years, 40 or 50 years? Are you grateful you have a roof over your head? Are you grateful you're not going to have to move, that you can stay in your residence? Are you grateful for all the people who came and hugged your neck, brought you casseroles, even sometimes when they said the wrong thing?" But it's about making gratitude, because some of you maybe have gardening background, and sometimes you have prepared the soil for whatever you're going to plant. Gratitude paves the way for improved grief. It's just really critically important. It changes the soil of your soul. So start the day with gratitude. Some people, though, really are struggling with the idea of what I call the dual grief. We are very good at saying, "I'm sorry your wife or your partner died." We're very good about that. A Hallmark has all these cards accordingly. But there's also the issue of going into, I'm sorry, I'm getting used to this. Okay, dual grief, that you really have like a cockpit with two wheels, or driver ed with two steering wheels. And we focus generally on the death, but not on the collapse of the assumptive world. And years ago, a great New Yorker named Jeffrey Kaufman created this idea that the assumptive world concept refers to the assumptions or beliefs that ground, secure, or orient people, that give them a sense of reality, meaning, or purpose in life. Each listening to me right now, as I do, we have hundreds and hundreds of assumptions. It keeps us from wearing our brain out. I learned that in a negative way this morning. I assumed I was going to pull out of Walmart. I assumed the car I saw coming, because the blinker was on, was going to turn at the major intersection. And so I was ready to pull out, and lo and behold, he cut right in front of me, because after all, he had his turn signal on. You see, in that moment, I assumed from previous experiences he was going down to the light, and he wasn't. Ronnie Janoff Boltman talked about, we all have these expectations for the world. You may have had a child that said, "It isn't fair. That isn't fair." And you've had various responses to that. But Janoff Boltman said that we really expect the world to be predictable and controllable. And if I can't do something about it, I can find someone who can. We expect the world to be meaningful, that it makes life worth living. It operates according to principles of fairness and justice, but that isn't always reality. And some widowers are widowers because of a deficiency of medical care that their spouse received. It basically should keep individuals safe and secure. So if you're not trying to, dry your hair while standing in a bathtub of water, you're probably going to be safe. But we want security. And some of us probably have more than one lock on the door. We cannot go to bed till we've kind of rotated through our residence, making sure everything is locked. But we think the world ought to be benevolent every once in a while. The life in the world needs to give us a little gift, whether that's all kinds of things that come our particular way. But the last is that people are trustable. And in long years, in working with the grieving, I have learned that people come into funeral homes and make all kinds of promises. Now, you just call me if there's anything I can do. I'm going to be there for you. And down the road, you learn that that's probably something they said because they were nervous around you. That yes, there are some people that are trustable and some people are not. In the years I ran grief groups at St. Luke's, I would always ask, who has been trustable to you? And who surprised you by their ability to be supportive of you? But each of us also has a very personalized, accessorized, assumptive world. I can't tell you the number of men who have told me over the years, I assumed I would die first. All the investments, the will, everything was arranged because I thought my wife would outlive me. And this is a huge problem with women who are caregivers to husbands that are critically ill, Alzheimer's or dementia. And somewhere they made a promise, you'll never go to a nursing home. And what we find is their bodies wear out and often they die by heart attack. It's one of those aspects we don't talk that much about, but it is a reality. Well, I assumed that we had great physicians, specialists we thought would. And sometimes at St. Luke's, where I ran grief groups, people would say, this is St. Luke's. You have billboards all over town telling what a great hospital this is. Then why did my wife die in your hospital? Because we thought if we came here, and we got people from 4 states, Oklahoma, Nebraska, Kansas, Iowa, and because they were coming to what they perceived as the great St. Luke's, we were going to work magic. Some people say we thought we could beat this. We would beat this. We'd had other health problems, and we just kind of thought we would beat this. For some people, and I've written about this extensively, some people have this belief God will heal her or God will heal him. God is a loving God, and God wants us, to be healthy, and God is going to heal them. And so this is a hard assumption to wrestle with. And I often ask people, are you angry at God? Oh, no, you can't be angry at God. And I go, well, yeah, you can. And because God didn't come through like God. Or I've heard incredible numbers of people said, we're heading toward retirement, and then we were going to have the rest of our life to live. We had saved, we had worked hard, and retirement came, and she died very unexpectedly. We thought we would enjoy becoming old or older together, or we had plans to travel. My father was a workaholic, so he wasn't much into travel, but my mother had this assumption once my dad retired, oh, we're going to travel, we're going to here, there, we're going there, and that did not happen. So 3 questions are really critical to ask or to ponder. And these may be difficult, and these are sometimes questions you try to ask or answer at 2 a.m., which is what assumptions have been validated? And then secondly, what assumptions have been invalidated? I have to tell you that our hospital was sued a great deal of times. And I was sometimes involved in that because they assumed, because of all of our billboards around town, that we were a great hospital and their loved one was not going to die in St. Luke's. They might die in a rural hospital 100 miles away, but they weren't going to die at St. Luke's. Or they assumed that the doctor was one of the top 3 specialists in the world. And I sometimes jokingly said, if there are 3 top specialists in the world, there has to be 3 bottom specialists. And sometimes that may be who you got. And then what assumptions are up for grabs? Okay, yeah, this is not going to work out the way I thought it was, but what assumptions? And I'm reading a book now called The Dechurched, De-churched. These are people who have left attending church, going to mass, going to synagogue, because sometimes they have a beef with the church, they have a beef with the minister, the priest, the rabbi. And so this whole area of religion is very much up for grabs. I thought I would live here and die in this community. And now I'm wondering if I need a change of location for my grief, to try a different place where I'm not seeing 1,001 memories every time I walk into this house. So the first key reality I want to talk about of 8 is that any loss, finite, meaning death, or non-death, threatens to upend our assumptive world. Some of you have had the experience of you hearing rumors about there's going to be a layoffs at your plant, your business, whatever your occupation is. And you thought, yeah, that's necessary because some people in here don't do any work, but boy, it sure won't happen to me. And some of you have had that horrible experience of being walked out the front door with your possessions in a box and sitting in your car going, what in the world am I going to do now? Eric Clapton said something when his 4-year-old Connor died in 1991. I felt like I'd walked into someone else's life. And I still feel like that. I felt like I'd walked into someone else's life. This wasn't the script that I had prepared for, and I still feel that particular way. And out of this experience, of course, he wrote that incredible song, Tears in Heaven. And recently I buried a young man who had died murdered. And his father, when we met to plan the funeral service, I asked him if he thought about music, and he said, I can't get this song out of my mind. I go, well, what's the song? And he said, Tears in Heaven. And so we had a chance to talk about the background. He wasn't really that familiar with how Eric Clapton had come to write that song. Key reality, too, is your future requires rebuilding fragile core assumptions. You're seeing these tornadoes sweeping over the Midwest and the South. And I saw that horrible scene the other day where in a previous tornado, I don't know, 6 months ago, 3 months ago, whatever it was, it had torn the roof off their house. And so sure enough, they put a new roof, and this time it destroyed their house. And you hear some people going, how are we going to rebuild a house? Or especially if the insurance is not going to be sufficient to build the house today. So we have to do the same thing with our fragile core assumptions. Some of them are far more fragile than we can imagine. And my colleague, Bill Hoy, who was at Baylor University for years, says grief is a process of adaptation whereby one finds a way to assimilate the loss and live in light of radically changed circumstances. And I can't tell you the number of people I work with through the funeral home who are now facing radically changed circumstances, and it wasn't with their cooperation, not with their cooperation at all. So how can we, and I guess I should say, you can't spend the rest of your life fighting those radically changed circumstances. Sometimes you just have to say, this is what it is. I'm not a poker player, but I'm going to try this. You play the hand that was dealt you. And this is what I was dealt, even though I certainly did not volunteer for it. Key risk 3 is we want to talk about the shapers of response to loss. The shapers, first of all, is the widower's relationship with the deceased. And I would put a caveat at the time of the deceased death. I have unfortunately buried drug overdoses, and they're hard on me because here is a husband who thought this time the recovery was going to last. They really, really thought that. And now they find themselves sitting in front of me in a funeral home planning a service. And it's very complicated when there are children. And you really thought this rehab was going to be the one that worked. There can be an issue with alcohol, all kinds of things that impacted the relationship from previous periods to the time of death. And some couples have really worked hard. I've worked with couples who went through a divorce, got back together, or often a separation, really got back together, worked hard, and then the death happened. And they're just like, why didn't that happen when we were angry at each other? Why did it happen after we had worked so hard? And then it's the widower's relationship with others. And I'll expand on this in just a minute, but the others can be everything from colleagues, it can be from in-laws, it can be from your own family, and it can be with others' understanding of grief, that they expect you to get over it, or at least they expect you to grieve in a manly fashion. So you got to suck it up. Don't sit there just crying all the time, and those various things. Many people do not realize that Woodrow Wilson, the great president of the United States, after his wife died in 1914, spent many a night in the darkness of the White House. One night, his daughter came by to check on her dad, and she knew he was in the White House, but he wasn't there. Well, where could he be? So she was going through rooms, flipping on lights. This is the White House, the President of the United States as a widow, Woodrow Wilson, widower. And finally, she found him sitting in a dark room. And he often told his Secret Service agent, well, no one killed me today, maybe tomorrow. Even though he was a brilliant PhD, great president eventually, but he could not live without his wife because Ellen, had made him. She had put aside her career as an artist to build his career as a political scientist. And then you have to ask what relationships have changed due to this death. I still remember a man who told me that his father-in-law wanted the TV back that he had given as a gift. And so he goes, okay, he's always been a little bit on the crazy side. I'll take the TV back, and took the TV to his father-in-law's house. And his father-in-law said, you know, to tell you the truth, I never, ever liked you. And he was just devastated. He said, how many Thanksgivings, how many Christmases, how many 4th of July picnics in the backyard? And then he tells me, I've never really liked you. And then what relationships have changed due to this death? That can be difficulty with children, particularly if you have teenagers. They feel so different than their peers. And sometimes the turf is very difficult trying to get them to talk, or would they see a counselor or something, and they cannot do that. And so you're thrown into being a single parent, and that can be so incredibly demanding of you. And you go, but I always relied on my spouse for X, Y, and Z. Then it's the manner of the loss. Was it a trauma? Here today and gone tomorrow. You kissed your wife goodbye. She went out to go on let's say to the grocery store or something, and she never came home. She was hit broadside by a drunk driver, and suddenly your life is turned upside down. That can be with a murder. It can be with vehicular accidents, building collapses, all these kinds of things. But it's traumatic because you have to wonder, did they suffer? Were they in pain? And a very existential question, were they calling out my name as they died? Now, it can also be it's anticipated. And sometimes that starts from the moment in that little waiting room when a doctor comes in, you take one look at his face and say, this is not going to be good. And you may have gone to MD Anderson, you may have gone to Fred Hutchinson, you may have gone to Cleveland Clinic. But I always tell people, there are morgues in all of those places. And then when it's a long illness, you've had roller coasters up and down, remissions, and then breathing space, and particularly with types of cancer that it comes back, quote, with a revenge. And sometimes a widower, before he becomes a widower in the making is saying, I don't know how much more I can take because your emotional resources of watching the demission of the one you love deeply. But Ellison McGonigal wrote a fascinating book called Liberating Losses. It's an old book, but you might find it in a library or used bookstore. And they wrote about the guilt of feeling relief for a death that happened, where you had been a long-term caregiver and you were exhausted, and there's just a sense of relief. But and sometimes people will phrase that question to you, well, you probably feel a sense of relief, don't you? And you're going, I can't believe you just said this to me. How dare you say that to me? But there can be a sense of which it's a liberating loss. And what do I do now with the rest of my life? Next issue is the widower's previous experience with loss. I believe very much in something called antecedent loss. So if I work with you, I want to go back to your childhood so I can get an idea of those early experiences of loss, because sometimes those are shaping influences, what you were told, what you were not told. And those previous experiences, this may be a second marriage. It could be a third or fourth marriage, given how elderly some people live to elderly ages. The perceived timeliness and untimeliness of the loss. I remember working with a brilliant lawyer in Kansas City who were planning their 50th anniversary at the country club. Friends were coming in from around the country. Their kids were going to be there, their grandkids, it was just going to be spectacular. And she had a massive heart attack and died 1 week before the 50th anniversary. And he asked me several times, Dr. Smith, how can you die 1 week before your 50th anniversary celebration when you know it's coming? How can that happen? And I will tell you what they did, rather pragmatically. Some of his kids said, well, we've paid for the food, we have the location, we're going to use that for the funeral meal. The spiritual and existential resources. Some people have great faith in God. One of the early questions I would ask in grief groups at the hospital would be, is anyone in this room angry at God? No, oh no, 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 no. And then one brave person would say, I am. And then everybody would start moving their chairs in case a bolt of lightning was going to come through. But spiritual resources are very important. But again, after 30, 60 days, even some spiritual resources are not going to be there. But also realize the diversity in this country, and it may not be spiritual or religious, it may be existential. I can play chess at the library every other Sunday with a group of individuals. And those individuals, even though I've only known them as chess players, have been so supportive, calling on me, checking me, taking me to coffee. The widower's support structures. Some of you have had losses through hospice, and so there's going to be support groups there. Many hospitals, many funeral homes have support groups. Now, here's what I've learned after 18 years at the hospital and 5 years in a non-hospital setting. Men sometimes feel overwhelmed in grief support groups because it's heavily female. And that overwhelms them, especially if the support group is about sharing your feelings, your emotions, those kind of things. And then some men just go, that group is not for me. And so sometimes I've said, well, let me tell you something. Would you think about, we're going to have another group meeting like in 3 months. Would you think about coming to that group? Because it may be a different mixture, but it's very difficult to get men to come and keep coming to support groups. And then your own string of if onlys. If only I had said to my wife, I'm going to go to the grocery store because I need to get something else, and I'll go to the grocery store and you stay here, would she have died? If I had been more insistent, honey, you have got to go to the doctor, or you've got to try another doctor. If only I had done this, then I wouldn't be a widower. And there are many good men who self-indict themselves because there's some sense of failure. If only I had done this, then my wife would still be alive. The key reality, number 4, is that widowers may juggle other losses or threaten losses. In today's job world, especially if you're a widower at a certain age, career, health, physical mobility, advancement in a career that may take, and this is particularly difficult for widowers, I have found, who are in sales positions, or where you have to go out and make a quota, or you have to travel away from your domicile, and sometimes your children, your pet, whatever, to go out and make those sales. That can also be under the pressure of teammanship. We're a team, we got to meet this goal, and everybody's got to carry their weight. Okay, real quickly, and I'm talking more than I should, but we're going to get some questions, is key reality 5. Widowers must acknowledge all these secondary losses, which is the way of life. It can be, or the standard of living. You really relied on your spouse's income. And that can be very interesting when your wife or spouse had made more money than you did, or that sort of thing. So who are you now? The loss of residences. Am I going to be able to stay in this residence, or do I want to stay in this residence? Because everywhere I look, there are memories of her. The loss of shared history and memory, that you can start a story and you watch your spouse go, huh, yeah, I remember. Oh, no, yeah, I've never forgotten that. Which makes it difficult for some people to go to certain places. One man told me, oh, I can't go back to Hawaii. Why? My wife and I went there 3 times. I can't go back now. And I said, is it possible that there are memories that will only surface in Hawaii? You need a Hawaiian cue to bring up that memory. The loss of little rituals. And I am really studying this more now. It can be that sense of we do breakfast on Sunday mornings. And, I get up and make breakfast for my wife on that Sunday morning. That's a little ritual. And now she's not there. So why make breakfast? I'll just, go get an egg McMuffin at McDonald's or eat some cereal. The loss of predictable sexual intimacy, and I've used predictable here because I have done a lot of work in the area of sexuality and grief. And there's something about the predictable sexual intimacy that you understand. And some men have been overwhelmed about the new dating world. And some of these men have been very overwhelmed by, aggressive women. I've seen this in retirement communities, sometimes in churches, and it's a bit amusing, but it's not really to the widower. The loss of in-laws. Maybe you had great relationship with in-laws. You went on shared trips, all these things. And now those change. It's not necessarily they're ended, but they change. The loss of shared holiday traditions. We went to the grandparents on Christmas Eve, but on Christmas was here. And the one man that told me, I never imagined how much my wife did to make Christmas look so good. And she did all these, sewing things, the little places, all these things around the house during Christmas. And then one night he was crying. And I said, what's wrong? And he said, I can't remember once, not once, ever telling her how proud I was and how much I thought of her for making our house look so good and the homemade look. The loss of the social organizer or the networker. It's kind of like the old days of the switchboard operator who would plug people in. Some of us are not good at arranging our social relationship, maybe in the work environment, but and a wife said, "Oh, we're going with the Jones Thursday night to that event," or "We're going out to the club for dinner Saturday night." They were the social networker, and now you're feeling like a fifth wheel. The perceived timeliness or untimeliness of the loss, the feeling that, not now, we were just getting ready to retire, or we were just getting ready to send our first child off to college, or we had just paid off the house, or our business that we worked so hard to get going had just really started producing some real profits, and we could breathe after those hard years. When it's that sense that, excuse me, I have gotten the wrong sheet. I'm sorry. But still, that's the reality. The loss of a cheerleader or affirmer. Some of us have had that experience of you are number one on somebody's internet, on somebody's attraction level. You are it. And that can sometimes be in long relationships. The sun rises and sets. My wife overlooks so much to affirm me. The loss of friends and neighbors, that changes. They may have made promises in the future in the funeral home, but that will change. The loss of shared anticipated future. We were looking at property in Florida. We were looking at property in Colorado. And so we were going to build a place and get away. And those things are not going to happen. And then the loss of friends, where you thought you had been friends 10, 20 years, and suddenly it's not there. Some of you know the name Morris Sendak, who wrote, oh boy, this is terrible. My mind just went blank. Where the mad things live, or something like that. And he lost his spouse. And 81, I think he is. And he said, I cry a lot because I miss people. They die and I can't stop them. They leave me and I love them more. And one man told me, I have to stop and think, are some of these people still alive? And he said, sometimes I have to think a while to think about it, but I miss those people. Six is to show hospitality today to memories. I have used a program. I could not find it in my slides so you would see it. But I took a piece of paper, folded it in half, and I said to my grievers, we're a bumper sticker society. Is there something you've ever noticed on somebody's bumper and you go, boy, that is so good? Or is there something you say, I'd like to write up something that would really get people's attention? And they did incredibly well. I was always utterly amazed. Now, admittedly, the most common was grief sucks. And so I went as if I had never heard that on a bumper sticker before, and on from there. Poetry. I'm a huge believer in poetry. At St. Luke's for 18 years, on the fourth session, my individuals were given a sheet of paper, and there was what I call the trigger line. Grief came knocking at my door one day. And 4 lines. And I told them, don't worry about spelling, don't worry about punctuation, but take this phrase, grief came knocking at my door one day. Think of it as clothes tumbling in a dryer, and then just turn that over in your mind and then start writing. Do not worry about spelling. Do not worry about rhyming. Do not worry about punctuation. And I have to tell you, my one regret serving at St. Luke's 18 years, I didn't keep the poetry, because they came in and wrote the most incredible poetry. I never gave it as homework because I was afraid one of them wouldn't come. Well, I couldn't write anything, so I'm not going to the grief group that night. But they also got encouragement from others in the grief group. That's good. And always the best was, will you photocopy that and bring me a copy? I want a copy of that next week. Or then I keep hoping that one of these days, and there's something about jumpstarting your brain. And again, it's not about spelling or punctuation. The last thing, and then we're going to take some questions. I've rattled on too much, is what I call ride the memoir train. Bill Valentine, his husband died in the World Trade Center. And he decided to write a book about their relationship. And he said, I would have the opportunity to write and speak from the deepest wells of my heart. As the one who knew him best, it was my privilege to tell the world what a beautiful man Joe Lopez was. It was my honor to speak openly of how two men came to devote themselves to each other and how Joe, in his gentle and determined way, taught me to love in a way I'd never imagined possible. It is an amazing, memoir. And I developed a concept called in training, and I'll say it real quick. But if you look at this railroad train coming towards you, there is the engine on the very start. But behind it, hopefully you can see 5 boxcars. And so what I tell people is your loss is the engine. And would you write a 3-page boxcar? 3 pages. Now, you're not writing about the whole life. You're writing about a little segment, what I call a memoir slice in the life. My wife's favorite flavor of ice cream, my wife's favorite dessert. What was something my wife said 1,000 times, or I could just look across to the table and know she was getting ready to say what. And then when you have 40 boxcars, you have a memoir. And again, not worrying about spelling or punctuation. And a biography covers a whole life, but a memoir only covers a period or chapter of your life. And a memoir slice covers an incident or characteristic. And I would highly recommend this little book AARP published. It's called Memoir is the Way to Figure Out Who You Used to Be and How You Got to Be Who You Are. And there is something about the 3 pages. I've told some people, I want you to get up in the morning and think about, what do I want to write? And then all day, just turn over ideas. And at some point in your evening, sit down and write 3 pages and just let it flow. Now, it's possible it might end up in the trash in 3 months. And you're saying, I can do better than that. But it's getting your life, your loss, your memoir into words. Now, many widowers have said, oh, I'll always remember this. I'll never forget that. But you do. It's like pictures that get too close to sunshine. And I have to admit, your memoir may never be published by Simon & Schuster or Doubleday or whatever. But with the computer printing programs we have now, you could print it, have it bound, pass it on, put a copy in your safe deposit box. And it's good to go back because your memoir that only you can write may help another widower. They may say, you put into words what I had only been thinking. And there's a jump starters if you get the handout. I want to say that 2 more, that your wife is not gone, your spouse is not gone until 2 things happen. You stop saying the name and you stop telling stories about them. I have done hundreds of funerals, committals, memorial services, in every one of them. That's what I say. Your loved one is not gone. You stop saying the name and you stop telling stories about them. And the very last thing is nexting. And this is from a brilliant widow named Elizabeth Harper Neal, and her husband just dropped dead jogging. And she wrote, all right, the future is not going to be what you thought it was. It's gone, and you're not going to have it. You just will not have it. Your future went with name. Now you've got to build a new one. And that is exactly what this concept of nexting is like. This is the last slide I'm going to do. And Daniel Gilbert, a great neuropsychologist at Harvard, he says our brains have a unique structure that allows us to mentally transport ourselves into future circumstances and then ask ourselves how it feels to be there. And Dr. Gilbert often said it's like trying on a pair of shoes just to see how they fit. But the important thing is what my friend Stephen Riley closes with. I need you to remember something. We call it Gunkel Rule, Sweet 16. I want you to really live. To live is the rarest of things. Most people merely exist. And that's an incredibly troubling statement. Most people merely exist. Okay, I'm sorry, Ken, I went on so long. You should have sent me some kind of signal or, I don't know, something to get my attention, but I
No,
want to
not at
throw a
all.
lot of material out there.
No, I absolutely related to so many of those points, Harold. It
Thank you.
was absolutely a very moving presentation,
Thank
and
you.
I can't say that might have been like one or two things that didn't apply, but I'd say about 99%. As I mentioned to you before we hit air, I lost my Sheila due to breast cancer, and I asked myself so many of those questions. And I think
Ah,
one of the things that I was thinking is that we're supposed to be fixers. That's kind of our role.
yes.
And
Oh, yes.
uh, the guilt that some of the things that you had mentioned there is, I think, also tied in with that. We're supposed to fix this, we're supposed to get them through
Ah,
it.
yeah.
And there's that guilt that comes about, I think, also because of that. Well, we couldn't fix it. We didn't fix it. Now, rationally, you understand that we can't really battle cancer by suiting up in some armor and going in and fighting it in a way that we would traditionally think that we would punch somebody out or eliminate an enemy. And it becomes overwhelming that we have this helpless feeling that we couldn't do anything about it. That's a difficult thing, I think, for a lot of men to deal with.
Yes. 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 And sometimes it's that little imposed question, well, you must have known she was losing weight. You must have known she wasn't eating as much or was, and they can just plant, that's like a little seed that goes in and just starts multiplying. Um, and it is a wonder to me that more people have not been beaten severely about the head and shoulders in funeral homes because they come into a funeral home and they will say some of the craziest stuff. And you want to say, I don't believe I would have said that. But sometimes they're nervous. They don't. And one widower told me, at least they're saying something. It's the quiet ones. And he said, some of my male friends will, they just shy away from it. Got to go. And he said, people have dodged me in the store, in the grocery store. And he said, do they think it's contagious or something?
Yeah, yeah. I think that there's also that idea that you're going to say the wrong thing or it's going to come out sounding wrong. So it's best maybe to what was it, Mark Twain, who said it's better to keep one's mouth closed and be thought a fool than open it and to remove all doubt.
And we need Mark Twain today to say that.
Yes.
Yeah,
So I
yeah,
think that enters into it too. And I have to admit that even though I've suffered this significant loss in my life, I have a close friend of mine that just recently lost his wife to gallbladder cancer, which is a nasty one. Well, none of them,
yes,
but that happens very suddenly. His wife passed within about a month or so after
yeah,
diagnosed. I found it difficult to know what to say, even though I've
yeah.
experienced loss on that level too. So it's not even something that comes naturally or easily, other than to say that I'll be there. But then you also brought up that point before about maybe not overextending an invitation, that don't write your mouth can't write a check that what's the expression again, that you can't write a check that your mouth can't back up. I'm quote pretty badly, but yeah,
Yeah, that's
it's
good.
actually coming through with that promise of always wanting to be there and as you said earlier, to bring the casseroles or to bring some kind of
Yes.
sympathy and support that
I'll
is.
tell you one quick thing I learned years ago. There was social workers down in Georgia, good old boys, not the tradition. And they got this idea and they went to the lumber company and said, we want to build gazebos in public spots and we're going to use widowers to do it. And the lumber guy was going, what do you mean? Well, they won't sit in a circle and talk to each other about their grief. But if we tell them, boys, we got to go out there and build a gazebo, he said, you'd be amazed how that works. And he said, hammering side by side, they will talk. When's your wife die? Or something like that. But they would not do that in a circle. And he talked about how many gazebos they had built. And for some of those men, it was a new male friend in their life because we got it through workings and sweat. And it was just a marvelous idea.
Yep. I think that's another difference between how men maybe react and how women do, because men are very action and activity oriented.
Yes.
Women are much more networky and open with their thoughts and feelings in a way that maybe not all men are, or even maybe can be. Uh,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So let's get to some questions from our
Okay.
viewers here. Um, hang on, my radically changed circumstances, especially when rehab failed and our marriage relationship changed. It's not fair, and I'm angry. Suggestions on how to manage one's anger. That's a big one, because I also related to what you were saying earlier about anger about the hospital, anger about God, and my take on the God thing is that he's a big guy. He could probably withstand a couple of fist shakings at him, and the anger that you feel. So our listener here wants to have,
Yeah.
you have any
Well, a
suggestions about
priest
how to
told
manage?
me that the issue is indifference. That's what is painful when you just go, I don't care about God. I don't, and there's an Old Testament passage that says God devises ways so the banished do not remain estranged from him, that God thinks up ways. And I think one critical thing I would say is write that anger out, get it on paper, and just it's almost like opening a vein and letting the blood out. Or it could be at a computer. Write it. What exactly is it about? Let's say the hospital. What specifically is it? And you may have to date it, put the date and time on it. I did that when I was going through a divorce, and then you circle back to it. Why did I write that particular? Oh yeah, that had happened. The only issue, I tell people anger is very much a part of grief, but it does drive some people away because most of us don't like to be around angry people. And that can be very troublesome, that they're so afraid of saying the wrong thing that you're going to have an explosion and just blow up. And so I would crucially say, write it out. Go to Walmart and get one of those school notebooks. Just write page after page. Now, I tell you what, some people I've urged to do is tear it out of the notebook, put it in an envelope, mail it to yourself. Because there's something about hearing that the old mailboxes click when you got it in, let it go back. And then sooner or later that comes to you and you read it. I've showed some people just don't open it yet, put it somewhere and let it percolate. And then when you're ready, say, I want to look at this anger. And, it can be things like going into a restaurant and watching a couple have an argument. And suddenly it's just like, um, and then you wonder, boy, did I ever treat my spouse in public like that? Or it's little things. It doesn't have to be a Megatron bomb, but little things sometimes set us off. I can't remember something, or I don't remember this. I just counted on my wife to remember it. Now I'm angry. Um, but the anger is like an acid. It really hurts you. It is right to be angry in grief, but you've got to have a chance to say, what am I going to do with the anger? There was a guy in Kansas City when I lived there, the older man, he chopped wood every day. It was unbelievable that he would spend 5 or 6 hours, very healthy man, but he'd be out there on that pile. And a lot of people got firewood out of the deal. But it was a way for him to take out that anger on that big log, to chop and chop and chop. With some people, I've suggested go to a gym and punch out one of those bags.
Right. Logic bag.
Yeah, it's taking the anger, putting it into energy, and then some of it dissipates, and you kind of go, just take a deep breath, and I think I feel a little bit better. Yeah.
Yeah, with regard to that, I think that writing also is key, as you were mentioning about getting the notebooks, and I think that could be a lot of pressure as well. So I think it's good if you just maybe take some notes. Maybe you think of
Yes,
a good phrase or something that sums up how you
yes,
feel. It doesn't mean that you have to really be committed to writing, the memoir of
yeah,
your
yeah.
life. It could just be a compilation of notes that maybe down the road you can compile into something a little bit more cohesive.
And what's so important is to date it. On this day, the 4th of March, 19 whatever, at 8 p.m., I felt this way. And later, I mean, it's amazing how sometimes we can see progression sometimes in what we're writing. Well, I don't think that way anymore. I can't believe I thought that or said that or put that on paper, but I can see some growth I'm experiencing. Yeah.
Right. I'm also reminded of the great Tom Hanks movie, Forrest Gump, where he just decided all of a sudden to get out and run. And he didn't
Yes.
really know what he was running, but it was almost like a transformative,
Yes.
like a vision quest type of thing that
Yes. Yes.
transformed by him throwing himself completely into that.
And this is going to sound strange. I told you before the broadcast, I've just been in Haiti. I mean, Tahiti. I've been in Haiti, but this was Tahiti. And the use there of grief tattoos, I was very, very amazed by it, that you can tell a whole family story. And, it doesn't have to be an elaborate tattoo. It doesn't have to be any of those things, but it's that deliberate process. I did this, so I remember. I will tell you, I was watching after coming back from Tahiti. I've really looked now at tattoos, and there was this young kid at the Coke machine at McDonald's, and he had tattoos everywhere. And I said, "You have tattoos? You have a lot of tattoos?" And he says, "Yeah." And I said, "Well, I've been in Tahiti." And so then I looked right here in this part of his hand. There was a heart, and there was a figure here, and there was a halo over his head, and an initial R, and then over here was G. And I said, "Now, what is that?" And he said, "Oh, that's my granddad." And he said, "Yeah, I want to have it where I can see him and remember him. That's why he has a halo, because he's in heaven. And this is my grandma, and she's still with us, but it just helps me." And I was fascinated. The 19-year-old young guy. I just happened to look down at McDonald's. We was there at the soft drink dispenser and noticed it, and it produced some conversation. So it doesn't have to be this massive tattoo, but something very simple that speaks to the individual.
Right. I want to read another question that we got here,
Okay.
from the viewer. What is the best motivation to get up and get out of bed when you're grieving and feel like doing nothing? Which, of course, relates to the very topic of what tonight's session was named, about putting the covers over your head.
Yeah. A couple of things. One is to have the awful list. Things you've been delaying, like cleaning the toilet, scrubbing down the walls of the shower curtain. And so you got those, and you go, okay, if I lay here in this bed more than 15 minutes, I got to get up and do one of the things I don't want to do on this list. And I know it sounds kind of crazy, but it is that sense of what is the benefit of staying here. Now, the opposite of that is the people who rush out and just say busy, busy, busy all the time, going and coming, going and coming. But it's the sense of what is gained by being in this bed. And I will say that that is one thing some widowers have to do. They have to befriend that actual bedroom and the bed, because it was a source, whether it was reaching out in the night and just touching your wife, or listening to her breathe, and now that space is empty. So what are you going to do with that intimate space? And it's facing it. What do you gain by staying in bed? I used to ask the grievers at the hospital, how are you sleeping and where are you sleeping? Because I wanted to know if they were dozing off in a recliner for a couple hours, wake up and go, oh, I got to get in bed. And then off to bed they go and they're wide awake. When and how are you sleeping? Then I ask them, what is your rapport right before you go to bed? Because with your wife, you may have had some rapport. Well, we always brushed our teeth, or I went out and checked the doors, make sure everything's locked, or she did, or whatever. What are those routines? Who made the bed? Who changed the bed? those are little rituals that kind of pop up. They're like little pop-ups that can create some real disturbance. I've had men who go, I can't sleep in the bed anymore. I sleep in the guest room or I sleep on the couch. And I go, okay, how are you sleeping on the couch? Is that really working out well for your back? And I know for some therapists don't go that direction. That's rather intimate. But I go, most grievers are struggling with nitty gritty, the little things. They're not always with the existential issues. It's how do I get through this day? And this is going to sound strange, but I'll just tell you, I've used this for years. I've asked them, did you learn this little song, prayer at bedtime? Now I lay me down to sleep. Yeah, oh yeah, yeah. My mother and grandmother told me that. Why don't you dust that off and just try it? Now I lay me down to sleep. And I said, that prayer was not written for children. You know that, don't you? And they go, what do you mean? I said, that was written during one of the great epidemics in Europe. Nobody knew who was going to be awake the next morning. So adults were praying that as much as children. It's kind of lasted for children. But now I lay me down to sleep. I had one person that taught me they drew a large heart with their finger on the bed and then went to sleep. They said, I'm acknowledging that someone is missing. I'm not trying to pretend it's not there. I'm just drawing this heart to say, this was a place of great love and affection and tenderness. And I remember that and I acknowledge that. And I met some of these ideas may sound a little wacky, but sometimes wacky works for some individuals. They've tried everything else and wacky just, and I go, would you try that for 30 days? Well, just for 30 days and come back and tell me how it's working out for you. And like those gratitudes, I've asked grievers over the years, would you be willing to do this for 30 days? You'll promise me that every night before you go to sleep, you'll name 3 things you're grateful for, just 3 things. And I said, Irving Berlin made a lot of money in 1944 writing this song, and I fall asleep counting my blessings. I said, now if that's true in 44, when the background was US war casualties were escalating because we were now on the European continent. We were more engaged in the Pacific and deaths were happening far more common. And the brilliance of Irving Berlin, those little words, and I fall asleep counting my blessings. I do that every night. Every night I've done it for 10 years. It just helps me go to sleep. I want to be a grateful person.
That's great. Great insight. We have another question that's basically around what you were talking about previously, as far as revisiting places that you associate so strongly with your spouse. Is it better to actually desensitize oneself to go back to like the park where you used to cycle or run together? Or is it better to really avoid it or give yourself a break and maybe wait till you're ready to go back to some of these places? Or if you honeymooned in Italy,
Oh, yeah.
and then say, I'm never going back to Italy
Yes.
ever again.
I use the strategy called the hot fudge sundae. Right now, I don't want anybody in your audience, no one is to think of a hot fudge sundae. Just don't think of it. Put it out of your mind. Don't even think about it. Well, statistically, very few of you, before I said that, were thinking of hot fudge sundaes. But now that I've said it, don't think about it. You're thinking about it. So I think that works. Now I tell people, make it timed. I'm going to go by the park, but not stop. I'm going to go in the entrance to the park for 10 minutes, just 10 minutes. I've said with some people who tell me they can't go to a favorite restaurant. One man told me, we lived at that restaurant. As my wife got sicker and could not cook, well, we went to this place and they all knew us. And he said, I can't go back. I can't go back there anymore. And I said, is it possible that there are some great memories that won't happen if you don't go there? So would you just go to that and sit in the parking lot, not go in? You just drive there, sit in the parking lot, drive home or drive somewhere else. Okay, how did that go? Okay, would you be willing to go in and order a salad, just a salad, not the entree, just the salad? And if it's too much, leave some money on the table and leave. But is it possible you can, in these little increments, because it said it's possible some of those waitresses that you knew so well really want to reach out to you, but not in essence, they don't know you well enough to come to your home or call you up. But if you come in there, they may pour you a second cup of coffee and just say, now, how are you doing? If you make it, I can't do this. I cannot do this. To change it, I will probably not go back to Italy. I know that's wordage, but words work in our brains in certain ways. And to say, what am I missing out if I don't go back to some of those places? I see that with people in churches. They can't tell me they can't go back to that church because one man told me she sang in the choir. And every Sunday when the choir came out, I always sat in the third pew, she would turn and grin. And he said, I cannot go to that church anymore and see the choir come in. I said, well, okay, what if you went after the choir comes in? Maybe like during the first hymn, you go late. So you're not having that particular cue. And I don't know, he never did tell me if that really worked very much, but sometimes we do take little baby steps. Basically, grief is not about quantum leaps. It's about very small incremental changes. Yeah. And it might be asking someone to go with you. I can't face this restaurant, so I'll buy you breakfast if you'll go with me. And maybe you won't even talk about anything, but you're there, you eat breakfast, and well, it's not so bad. Yeah, I wasn't really, but if you spend your life saying, I will not do, or I cannot do, that's going to shortchange a lot of incredible experiences that your life may want to bring to you and that cues great memories.
Thank you. We got another question here. I think we're coming to a little bit at time here, but I want to get a couple of more things in here. It says, regarding changing relationships, my wife was closer to our adult children and knew how to manage them and often was the gatekeeper between them and me. I'm much more assertive than she was. Now there's no buffer and I have to deal with them directly. Any suggestions on how to deal with adult children?
Yeah, that's the huge issue. And I tell you where I've written about it. I did a major journal article called Mama's Dead and Daddy's on Viagra, which is about the tension between daughters. My dad has lost his mind. He is seeing someone. And I go, well, okay, let's talk about that. But the anger they have, and sometimes you just need a family powwow to say, only the children, not in-laws, only the children. We need to talk. Your mom related to you much better than I did. You know that. And this is one of the losses I'm really struggling with. And I need you to help me. I miss your mom, you miss your mom, and we're in this together, but can you help me know how to do this? I laugh. It's a good thing my dad went first because I would call home and my dad would say, where are you and how's the weather? Because I traveled. And I tell him what it was. Okay, here's your mother. Talk to her. I talked to my mother 40 minutes. And then she would tell him what she wanted him to know. If mom had died first, boy, that would have been a hard issue to kind of walk through. But you just need to say, it's probably tough on you. And yes, I know that's an established pattern, but you're still my dad and you're still my daughter. And I want us to really, find a way through this. It's like a wilderness. And I can't find a way out on my own, and you're not going to be able to find a way out on your own. But if we hold hands, we may be able to get through this. There can be also issues between parents and children that have been fully fleshed out. And so those can be a little, you run the Geiger counter over and you're hitting, and sometimes you have to say, can we go back and revisit that? And to set it up ahead of time, not spring it on somebody, but I was wondering if next Thursday you could meet me at this place over coffee, and I'd like us to talk about this, which we've never talked about, but I really would like to get your perspective on it. If you spring it on them, that's not going to work as well, but if they have time to think about it, And these are very critical. And I can't tell you the number of families I've worked with in the funeral home where dad remarried right away. The new wife was nothing like mom. And oh my God, and it's tough, and it's tough for me to do a service. I did one where the new wife was the only person sitting down front in that funeral chapel. The children would not come and sit with her. And I'm going, okay, you don't want to consider yourself stepchildren, but this is a grieving woman and she needs you to sit there. And they wouldn't do it. And I was just kind of like, okay, let's focus on. But I still remember the sadness of that service, that sitting all by herself. And I was stunned when finally this young grandson came walking down and sat down beside his grandma and put his arm around her. And he sat by her. And I thought, this is a great kid. This kid's got soul. I wish some adults had done that, but it's really tough sledding. I did research for the University of Wisconsin called postmortem discoveries, which things you discover you didn't know about or you'd kind of forgotten about, and some of which have major consequences now over settling an estate, for example, or something my mom promised me. I can't tell you the number of things of men that have gone a bit nuts and boxed up stuff and taken it to Goodwill or the thrift shop. And where's mom's good china? I don't know. What am I going to do with that china? I don't need it. Well, where is it? And sometimes it can be retrieved, sometimes it can't. And those are tough issues because you went back to this fix it. Okay, I need to get rid of all my wife's stuff. That's what I need. Just get all the stuff out of here that's cueing memories of her. And you go, okay, what about if we agree 10%? You will get rid of 10% of your wife's clothes, just 10%, and see how that goes. And then maybe another 10%. Or, your wife had very nice clothes. Who might be able to wear these? Might be able to enjoy them, would be really meaningful to them. Or, as I've showed some people, box it up before you give it away. Box it up and go back and revisit those boxes. Yeah.
That's a very pertinent point for me personally, because I really grappled with giving away all my wife's clothes and possessions and handbags and all that sort of thing. So
yes,
it's also like an admission, I suppose, that
yes,
yeah,
she's not coming back, and there's a finality to that
yes.
that can be very difficult to do, especially if you were rushed into it by someone or you rushed into it yourself. And then sometimes you can have real regrets. Yeah.
Right. Well, I think we're at time, Harold. It's been a great conversation.
Thank you
for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
And I'd like to thank all of you for coming tonight. The questions were great. And as we said at the top, we want you to know you're not alone. Always feel free to reach out to us. If you want more info, email us or check out our websites, nationalwidowers.org and mensgriefnetwork.org, where you'll find many resources and links to this and other workshops available on our YouTube channel.
And if they want copies of my handout, I don't see it on there, it's somewhere, but that you'll send it to them. Yeah.
Yes, you're psychic, Harold. I was just about to mention.
Oh, I'm sorry. I blundered in.
No, I'm glad for that reminder, actually, too. But yes, we'll be emailing the notes and further information at Harold's talk tonight to all of tonight's attendees. Just shoot us a message, and we'll be happy to send that out via email. Harold, do you have a website or ways that
I don't
contact you?
I'm not tech oriented. That's why a couple times tonight you go, this guy doesn't even know how to advance the slides. I'm in the process, I guess, that I need to get one and I need to do something about it. So you may have just nudged me to find a 9-year-old or something that can set up a website for
There
me.
you go. Maybe that guy at McDonald's with the tattoos.
Yes.
But I guess we'll stay tuned for that one anyway.
All right.
But I also want to make mention, join us on the last Wednesday of every month for our NWO Zoom workshops at 8:30 Eastern Standard Time. Our next workshop is on June 26th and will be on the really fascinating topic of ketamine as a potential aid in grief work.
Ah,
Ketamine's a relatively new therapy, and it's been shown
yes.
to promote the growth of new connections in the brain, which can help interrupt the cycle of persistent sadness and despair that often accompany grief. And if you missed any part of tonight's webcast, would like to watch it again, because there was a lot of great information in tonight's presentation, or send the link to a friend or loved one. The links are posted on the Men's Grief Network website, the Men's Grief Network Facebook page, and the Men's Grief Network YouTube channels. You can also watch all past webinars on the Men's Grief Network YouTube channel. And if you have suggestions for future workshops, email us at info@nationalwidowers.org and check out our sites at mensgriefnetwork.org and nationalwidowers.org. We depend on your feedback to serve you better, so please keep in touch and let us know what you'd like to see more or less of. And if you're watching us on YouTube, don't forget to do the usual YouTube thing and like and subscribe. That really helps us get the word out to other widowers, and hit the bell to be alerted to all upcoming NWO set webinars. I'm your host, Ken Levy. Thanks again for joining us. Take good care of yourself, and good night.
Good night.